I know.
That's good. Started up.
Everyone. Good to see you all coming as always. So we'll hopefully you got to look at the agenda and the materials, and if you didn't read them all in great detail, that's okay. So I will say that this meeting, probably the first half will be more me saying things to you and take questions, comments, but fewer questions or things for you in the first half. So I'm going to try to get through those items relatively quickly. And then kind of the biggest component of the meeting, which we would like to have probably more time on the agenda than we show on the agenda for, is the system-wide recommendations. So when we get to that point, we're going to present that. We're going to present kind of an overview of it and some examples, but we're not going to go through every single recommendation in the 16 or whatever page document it is. But we'll let Lauren do that because you'll be very tired of hearing me talk by then. And then we'll kind of take them by category and just see what comments you have. Is there anything missing? Is there anything that seems out of whack to you, et cetera? And then we'll talk a little bit about the agenda.
Oh, can you?
There we go. Okay, so that's the system-wide recommendation. Again, I'm hoping we'll have actually more time with that show. And then the capital improvements project list, we're actually going to talk about that in some detail at our next meeting. So today is mostly to kind of introduce that topic, talk about where are these things, where are these projects coming from, what are some of the criteria we'll use at the staff or team level to evaluate or prioritize them, and just get your comments on that. Not so much dig into the specific project. We'll talk about those at the next meeting. So I think we actually won't necessarily need as much time for that. And so again, we may spend a little more time on recommendation, and then we'll do next steps. So that's the agenda. How's that sound? Pretty good. Yeah.
I'm doing a quick round of introductions. If you all kind of remember each other, who we are.
All might be good to do. Yeah, I appreciate the refresh. Yeah,
Okay.
refresh. Right. Sure, Matt Hasty, MIT, both team.
I'm Brent Paulson. I'm an admin class director. Here I'm project manager of the Parks and Recreation City. Lauren Scott, also with MIG. Team. Maria Bigelow, manager of the Adult Center for Parks Park. Doing head, community member, Palisade neighborhood.
Jim Meyer, community member.
Peter Ellison, Park Sport.
Master Gutierrez, Park Sport, and I live in.
Carol Orvieto, and I'm on the sustainability advisory. And Nick Matsushima, and I'm with ATRA, the Historic Resource.
Not again, it's Park Sport. Like,
Oh, we do have people on. Thank you. We have Kelly Berg online. Kelly is our AD coordinator for the city and engineering. And we also have Robin Krakauer listening in. Robin is the Parks and Recreation and Communications extraordinary.
Awesome. Thank you for that. Oh, so we always have time, public time. Anybody that's not ready, working back. So that was quick. All right, so just kind of a reminder of where we are in the so we're kind of nearing the process of actually starting to put together the Parks 2040 plan document, and the sort of final few steps of that are this implementation and action plan phase, and that encompasses the system-wide recommendations. So we're going to talk about tonight, the capital improvement project list that we talked about tonight, the next meeting, and then information related to funding and any other sort of implementing actions or strategies that it will. So we're kind of near the end of that phase, and then we'll move into actually pulling all the information together that we've been putting on over the course of the project. That's what happens in that plan development phase. We'll have a couple more meetings with you all during, one again next month, talk about the CIP, and then another one, routine funding stuff and the like a draft it. And continuing the same sort of process with the Parks Board. We met with City Council. Right? Yeah, we had a briefing with them last week. They had a lot of good comments and questions for us. Let's see, we spent some time talking to them about the essential service access and equity analysis mapping that we've done, which some of them found very interesting, and others were like, don't like overdo that. You know, we need tangible recommendations. I think, you know, what we said is this is a tool, one of our tools to prioritize projects, and we've done this work, so we're presenting it, but it's not everything we do. So anyway, but they did have a lot of good questions. So let's say, hey, that's really important. And some of them sort of were really ready to like look at specific project recommendations. So, but it was a good briefing. I mean, again, I think they had good thoughtful comments and questions. So that's kind of where we are in the process. Another thing that's happening over the next several weeks is the second online survey, which we will use to help us prioritize those capital improvement projects. So we're still kind of developing the survey, but the plan is for that to go out and be undertaken by folks during the next month or so. We come back to you, we will be able to start talking about it later. So that's an overview of where we are. Any questions? So just I won't belabor this too much because I think you've seen the slide with the box around a different set of things, like probably every meeting. So, and I've already sort of talked about this a little bit. This sort of current phase, we've had meetings with you in the Parks Board, and again, got a couple more to go. We had the neighborhood workshops, which I will talk about in the next few slides. Then I talked about the city council briefing survey. And then in terms of once we get into that plan development and adoption process, really the main engagement points are meetings with you and the Park Board and the city council. We're not planning a bunch of big public meetings, but we will have that. But it really is sort of a compilation of the work we've been doing. That's the thing. That's going to be so that's kind of where we are here. So neighborhood workshops, I know some of you came to these, or came to at least one. I won't put you on the spot, so don't leave or raise your hand. Raise your hand, but I saw some of you there. But I'll talk about them a little bit in terms of what we did and what we heard. Really, I'm going to say kudos, especially to Kira, and then to all the other folks who helped take part in these and set them up. They were really, I thought, quite fun meetings. Like if I have to go to a public meeting, hey, especially on a Friday afternoon, if it's in a park with ice cream and a DJ and good weather, that's pretty good. So that's kind of how these meetings were. They were very, they were fun meetings. And so we had 4 of them in Pilkington, Westlake, Pavilion, Foothills Park, Field. And the idea was to, you know, spread them around the city. So we were hearing from people in different neighborhoods, and people could go along without having to travel too far. I will say there was some people who we saw at all of them with their kids. It looked like they made it into a summer activity, which I thought was awesome, and a way to like get out there and explore multiple parks within the city. So I thought that was really cool. But I'd say well attended. Some, more people than others. Everybody who came was like really good at engaging in the interactive exercises that we had people do. I don't know. I think the only people we couldn't pull into that were maybe some teenagers in Foothills Park. I heard were, the rapid ticket was not enough for them. They didn't want to go. But in most places, people were really happy to be engaged. And that was the other thing. There were a bunch of raffle prizes. People sports were pretty good swag at these events, which was nice. So that was again, kind of the goal was to have these in different parts of the city. I'll say just a little bit about some of the things that we heard at these. So for folks who were there, you know this, we had 3 interactive exercises. In one of them, we had some lists of projects that were categorized by cost. And we asked people to prioritize those within each of the cost categories. So we said, hey, these things that are a little less costly, tell us which 4 of them you think are most important. These things that are somewhat more costly, tell us which 2 are most important. These things that cost the most, tell us which one you think is the most important. This is, I think, kind of summarizes on average or in total what people said among those activities was, or those types of projects were the most important. So in terms of the list of things that were more moderate cost, street carrying facilities that are in need of repair, spaces for people to just gather and picnic, have barbecue, more year-round recreational activities, so covered spaces and indoor programming, and then in some ways a little similar, shade trees, you know, out in parks, and drought-tolerant landscaping, things that are climate resilient. So those were the 4 things that sort of rose to the top. I really like when I looked at the exercises, like a lot of people thought about these, but those were the things that kind of rose to the top in that category. The things in sort of the next cost category, the high cost, and this you'll see in a couple of slides here, but completing trail or sidewalk connections between neighborhoods and parks, that was something that people thought was very important, and we talked about that in this group as well. And then again, updating existing park facilities, including play areas and shelters, important. And then when we asked people about a sort of shorter list of highest cost needs or types of improvements, the one that rose to the top was more costly improvements to existing parks. So things like splash pads, things that are not cheap, but with, you know, added amenity or value to existing park. It wasn't just splash pads. That was an example. Yeah, that's it.
You said facility repairs and update park facilities. You were drawing, is there an overlap?
Yeah, I think there's some overlap. I mean, I think that's sort of, I would say, a theme, you know, right? Like
Right.
each of these categories, like repairing, renovating, improving existing facilities and amenities is a pretty common theme.
Was it specific to playground equipment? Because, I mean, it's an observation, and that's not what I go to the park.
Yeah, I
You
mean,
do a pretty good job.
yeah, I think that's
I
true.
wasn't sure, like, because I talked to some people, and someone mentioned, oh, this needs to be, and you break down to it, yeah, like one of the swings on the Beluga Park in the back, you know, you're like,
Right.
okay, but like, does it get fixed in a month? Oh, yeah. You know, so, I mean, I was just curious if we got to dig down on any of that stuff.
I wouldn't say we did particularly in this exercise, because, you know, we had this list of categories of things and, they weren't described in a huge amount of detail. So there were probably, in some cases, there were a couple more words in this. But not.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I think, you know, fair comment. And the other thing is that, like, you know, you can make repairs, they don't always, and the city does make repairs, they're constantly repairing. And it always costs you money. At some of them, you got to replace the entire setup.
Right.
The other thing we asked people about was just kind of categories of system-wide improvement priorities. And so again, you're going to see, well, one, we have these 5 categories of things plus an other. People are pretty evenly split. Like none of these was hugely more important than the others, which was interesting to me. You know, it ranged from 18 to 26% in terms of the distribution of dots that people put on this board. But the things that did kind of have the highest percentage of response were similar to the last slide you saw, building more trails and paths, particularly connecting neighborhoods to parks. And then also increasing accessibility in park amenities, both trails, but also play structures and other things within parks. So, so those were the things that most of the top, but they were all, you know, important, which is, I guess, useful, but it makes it harder. You know, you uses to prioritize things. And then the last one, this one, we had kind of a set of images and examples of different types of facilities, and we asked people to tell us, and which of these things do you think are like most needed in your neighborhood, like your neighborhood parks within your neighborhood? And so just some of the things that people put dots on most frequently were water players, splash pads, obstacle courses or climbing elements, and then access to natural areas. So for that particular exercise, those were some of the things that rose to the top. And that's across all neighborhoods, but there was some difference in what people said. And in all of these, there was some difference in what people said in different parks that we went to. And in the summer, sent you all of the results of the meetings. You'll see also those things differ a little bit. They weren't each different too, but there were two. So, and I will say, as I always do with the thing like this is not a statistically balanced, but that's going out and talking to people in the park, getting them away things, but it's still useful and helpful information. Yeah, see the people that participated. So, maybe that was my last slide. Yeah, that. So, any other questions about that or comments or thoughts? Yeah, Julie.
So based on this, is there any, I assume like some of the things that were prioritized by people might fall into like a regular planning cycle. Was that considered and how we might parse those things that could be solved for now or like in the immediate future versus like 2040?
Yeah, so the thing that a couple things I would say. But one, that capital improvement projects list that I mentioned that we'll talk a little bit about tonight or our next meeting, it will include all kinds of things like this. And they will come from, I don't want to like get too far ahead of myself, but they will come from existing plans, from what people said at meetings, et cetera. And some of this will help us. And then what we'll have to do and get your help on is prioritize those things. And when we prioritize them, it's mostly, or in large part, going to be priorities by how soon does the city work on those things. And so, yes, some of this information puts with those priorities. That would be.
And the only other thing I would say too is that the distribution, maybe there is like, that might show that you have a really balanced and proactive Parks and Rec community. So people don't have like urgent pressing that everyone's really beating their heads and hands against the wall trying to get things done.
Yeah, there's not one thing where everybody's like, oh, you aren't doing this. And city's doing really a good job of that. That was one of the comments we heard.
We do hear that one, so.
Yeah.
Well, that's, yeah, I think after the hot summer, that seems to be this year's hot topic, but which is interesting to me on page 4, that building new athletic and sports courts and fields, pickleball is so low on the list now, when that was a hot topic last year. So I thought that was really interesting, that it's really.
With pickleball, I think what we see is it's not a huge percentage of the community who want it, but the percentage of the community who does want it, they want it really bad.
Yeah, and I think it's similar to splash pads. It's really geared mostly toward people with probably young children and pets, and which is.
Yeah, do you have an idea? Families versus demographics or ages.
You didn't really, we didn't gather that information in terms of like asking people to fill out a demographic chart or something, but informally, I will say, particularly at Westlake and to some degree, maybe at Pilkington as well, there were a lot of families with younger kids, like a ton, especially we found out, I think afterwards that at Westlake, there's like moms with young kids meetup group, like 20 of them. That on Fridays that meet there every Friday in the summer. And so they all came over to our meeting and weighed in. So there was a large percentage at that meeting of families with young kids, I would say. Not all of the folks fell into that category, but there were a lot of them. Pilkington, my recollection, and I missed one of them, I didn't go to the, but, Pilkington had a lot of families.
Well, the interesting thing about Westlake, that being my closest park, is that the playground is covered there.
Yes.
Yeah.
So that, when my kiddo was little and we moved to the neighborhood, that always worked out in the winter time, but it's getting hot and sunny. That's kind of nice there too.
Right.
Yeah, we hear about covering not just in the winter, but also for summer. For people to be able to play in the shade.
Yeah, so that's a good question, but I think we could sort of, again, qualitatively say. with
I'd
that-
say across the four, it was pretty balanced, like those two had a lot
Yes.
more families with younger kids. Palisades, I think trended a little bit older, and Foothills also, but then Foothills is like where all the teenagers hang out in the summer, so I think we got more like teenagers to come in begrudgingly for a musical.
Azalea probably trended a little older.
Yeah,
in
yeah,
my
that's the one in
sort of-
Palisades,
Oh,
yeah.
Palisades, sorry. Yeah. And, yeah, so. that's- Any other comments, questions?
I went to the first one, you guys, yeah, Ancient Park, and it was just great. I mean, great turnout, and, just everybody in the parks, staffs, was really good to see and see all of you there. So, yeah,
Yeah, there were, fun.
positive, you guys did great.
And a lot of what was great about it was, I think a lot of people, I mean, some of them came because they knew this meeting was happening, but a lot of them didn't. They were just there to use the park, but then they came and participated in the meeting, so that was really nice. So we definitely captured some people that we maybe wouldn't have otherwise captured because we were in parks.
And I think the DJ helped too.
The DJ was great, yeah.
Did you
Yes.
identify an area within the community that needs more facilities like the parks? Something there, but someone say, hey, I'll say, south of, south of the city, where the. So, I just, I was looking, I didn't see that.
Yeah, so again, I was at 3 of 4 and I heard whatever I heard, whoever was standing nearby, right? So I personally don't know that I heard that, although we did have the maps of the gap area analysis up and people did look at that and that was interesting if folks didn't, and so they saw what we were showing them in terms of where some of the gaps are. And also I will say that I heard directly from some people, not so much about there's no park here, but there's a park here, but it's really hard to get to, or it needs some improvements. And so just making it easier, improving a trail or sidewalk connection park would be really helpful. Or this park is here and it's kind of far from me, but if I had an easier way to get to it, that would at least help. So I did hear that, those kind of direct comments from folks.
So like accessing the existing facility, and that, or the suggestion actually creating.
Yeah, I heard from some people, which park is it? Maybe, but one of the ones, yeah, down there where like the roadway adjacent to it is not a great facility to walk. So like if you could improve that as a facility for pedestrian access to that park, that would really.
I did hear a couple people saying,
Yeah,
but specifically in your guys' neighborhood, in the kind of
The new bus route.
like road, yeah,
yeah,
in that area specifically, and that is one of our gap areas, as you guys know, and so I think people saw that and were like, oh yeah, we do like not have quite as much access to like parks, and there's aren't as many facilities down there. But I think people also recognize that there's just not like really vacant, land available.
Right.
all right. Okay, so let's see. So now we're gonna talk about the system-wide recommendations. I'll just kind of cover some things on this first slide. Then I'm gonna turn it over to Lauren and she's gonna walk through each of the categories. So, I'll say a couple things here. One, earlier on, we put together, you'll remember, a set of kind of system-wide goals and policies or strategies. Those inform the system-wide recommendations, so there's a certain amount of overlap between those things, but those fed into those, as did, input from you all at previous meetings, the park board, as well as, staff, we had a, workshop with staff where we reviewed, an earlier iteration of these system-wide recommendations and got a lot of good comments on that. One of the comments, which was really fair, was, a bunch of these things you're telling us we ought to be doing, we're already doing. And maybe you should just say continue to. We didn't put the words continue to in front of all those things, but we do have, matrix that sort of says, yes, this is something the city is already doing, and that's awesome. The city should continue to do these things. So there was sort of a recognition of that. And then the other thing I'll say, just in terms of the other arrow, is that the system-wide recommendations then inform or are implemented, not in all cases, but in a lot of cases by specific improvement projects, right? So they're about how to think about improvements to maintenance of, improvements to parks, but also programming, et cetera. So there will also be overlap between the system-wide recommendations and the specific projects that end up in that capital projects list that we'll look at later. So there's kind of a relationship between all of these things. So that's the real point of this slide. So it does get, I will admit, sometimes a little confusing, or there's a certain amount of overlap, and we're getting to our best to try to make it less confusing as we put the plan together. And then the last thing I'll say about this, before Lauren starts, is that we kind of the first iteration of the system-wide recommendations we put together, we did actually organize them by the goals in the strategic framework. We reorganized them for the purposes of this document by what we sort of thought of, and the consultant team as more functional categories, because we thought those might ultimately be, that might be an easier way for the city to track progress on doing things, or to organize them in terms of annual work plans, et cetera. But there's no, there's no magic way to organize this. Like, we may end up kind of reverting to organizing by the goals or something else. So I guess I would say, don't get too hung up on does this thing belong here? Does it belong somewhere else? It's more, is this thing important? Does it further this thing, even though maybe you think, oh, maybe it should be over here? And in doing that reorganizing, we tried to reduce a certain amount of duplication that we had found in the first iteration. And we didn't completely eliminate it, but we did try to reduce it. So those are just some kind of introductory comments about what you see here. And then the last thing, I promise I'll turn it over to Lauren, what I'll say about this topic is that in terms of what we present in the PowerPoint, we're going to show examples under each of the categories, but we're not going to show on the screen all the things. But we want comments on all of it. So
I guess I'll also say real quick, if you have super wordsmithy comments, you can just email those to me. That's probably easier. Or you misspelled whatever, you forgot the, I mean, I don't know. You can just, if there's just email them to me.
Yeah, that's a good comment. Yeah, definitely if there's substantive things that are missing, we hear that tonight, but if it's more choice of words, or as you said, misspellings, like hear it out.
Put it in words. Okay, that's no problem.
All right, so I think I'll have Lauren kind of take over from here and talk about the categories. We're going to talk about specific.
Okay, yeah, I won't over repeat anything that was already said too much. The only thing that I will add is that it may appear a little bit funding recommendation light. That is because the SDC methodology update that's coming later this fall, or kicking off now, is very much tied to the capital project list. So it's kind of a manner of, finalizing the capital projects list, finalizing the SDC methodology, and then going back and making those hard decisions about, funding strategies and potentially any parkland dedication requirements, things like that. So that will also be iterative and so these categories are really, like Matt said, based on function and outcome, and are a proposed shift from the vision and goals framework, but again, not set in stone. But, you know, we've got the administration, management, communications and partnership side, which is really about, you know, what is city staff doing internally? Some of them will have definitely public facing or physical outcomes that result for them. But different than, you know, park activation and amenities, which is really about making parks comfortable, enjoyable, safe places to be. Then we've got park design and development that covers some of the bigger improvements to parks. And then access and wayfinding, focusing on the ability to get to parks safely, both within parks and to and from your house. Then natural resources and nature integration that covers both the natural resources side of the plan itself, as well as connecting people to nature, which, you know, we've talked about as a really big community engagement theme. Then maintenance and operations and programs. That's
I give you this. You should be-
the power.
Yes.
So for the first category, like Matt said, there's a lot in here. We selected 4, one of those being potentially exploring a new joint use agreement with the school district, just because there is very limited land capacity to build a new sports complex that would have the athletic fields, but, you know, we have been hearing that sports fields are very high in demand. And just increasing community access to them has been a recurring theme. And of course, just pursuing partnerships in general, especially for areas where partners or other agencies may have recreation facilities in gap areas that we've identified. And then another new different one is either led by the Parks Department or supporting other citywide efforts to identify climate vulnerabilities. Both to natural resources and, you know, park amenities and infrastructure themselves and how they will be impacted by climate hazards, you know, wildfire, drought, extreme heat, forest vegetation pests. And then the last one, I think, was definitely in our vision framework that you all reviewed, but just improving the availability and accessibility of the city's website and making that information clear and have it be functional and easy for residents to get updates. So those were some of the things that were in that section. Feel free to talk about any of the others that are in the packet as well. We don't just have to stick to the slide.
There's a lot of under this category and everything like free paper. So, yeah, and it gives the, again, if you have comments on these, great. If you have comments on anything else in this section right now, and particularly if there's anything you didn't see, you know, or that, gosh, this doesn't make sense based on what we talked about. That's kind of what we're. Yeah.
I was struck by it. It seems like a lot, some of this is up to best practice. Even if there's no check box, if you're doing it, but, like the joint use agreement. There's a reason why I felt hard, and is that kind of the issue that I think folks is they want accessibility to fields. Look at the fields and they see them at peak, and then they, hey, why can't, you know, my kids soccer team practice here because of some music. I think that's fair, but I mean, isn't the objective there really to find one? That's a very specific recommendation. And is that what this body, this plan is kind of supposed to be doing, or is it more like find ways to provide community access to fields that are not necessarily, that are not owned by the city, but perhaps the city can manage, or is that, or should we be doing specific things?
I mean, I think it depends a little bit on what you're talking about. I think this recommendation specifically comes from a lot of people saying, hey, we really miss when you guys talk to each other and coordinated, because for a lot of community members that worked better for them. So this one and the one that comes after it, which you can see in your packet, which is coordinate with the school district to improve public access to recreation facilities, et cetera. That's sort of a, if we can't achieve the above, let's at least try to coordinate a little bit better. But I mean, I don't think that in every case, we're gonna be like, create an intergovernmental agreement with like West Lynn or anything like that. But for this one, we do know that there is a strategy that we can use to try and coordinate access of our two facilities. And we want to recognize the school district has been and is a partner for us. And they own a lot of land and a lot of public recreation facilities in the city. I think it would be a shame to not at least try to get back into some sort of.
So this,
And I think,
that's,
and from my perspective, I think there are some benefits to having an official or formal. You know, you have some certainty that people are going to be able to do these things at certain times. And I understand, I wasn't present for the falling apart, so I don't know the backwards. But
Well, and it could be more specific too. I mean, it could be like, maybe we're just talking about athletic fields now or something. I mean, there's different ways that could.
no, probably not. Field, but I just remember back when the schools were kind of open all the time and go use the facilities without any issue. Look back and think, yeah, why not?
And some of that, I mean, some of those things have to, right, just security concerns, et cetera. So sort of unlimited community use in certain facilities. Trying everybody to get back to that, but that doesn't mean that still city and school districts sit down and talk through, okay, what can we agree on and provide for information and a little more certainty about. But I think fair question. I think, yeah, that broader goal is like the overarching goal, but the joint use agreement would be a way to help better define what we're trying to figure out. Other thoughts about anything in this particular category?
I think the website is just across the board, everybody knows a major website. I think that's been more
Yeah.
Or, yeah,
Yeah, and yeah, that's not the only way to provide. I think we have at least two of these recommendations that are around other means of information digitally.
I guess I do have a question about the third one, supporting or leading efforts to identify climate vulnerabilities. I don't know, I don't, I'm not really sure, I mean, we've got a Parks and Rec advisory board, we've got sustainability advisory. Not really sure how that fits into the Parks 2040 specific.
Do you think it would make more sense to follow sustainability advisory boards lead more or like?
Well, I mean, no, I'm not really sure. I mean, there's, there's the whole climate action plan being updated. I thought with some of the board, there was with the natural resources, the tree inventory. I don't know, it seemed like there was a lot of that happening.
I think there is, and we actually have a bunch of recommendations in here in I think a later section that are all of the recommendations from the climate action plan that were like specific to parks, like battery powered electric maintenance equipment and stuff like that. We kind of pulled those out already, but then I think
Yeah, I'll just say that climate action plans are really geared towards reducing GHG emissions and are very much focused on the transportation system primarily, but can also take into account recycling and, solid waste. But climate vulnerability kind of encompasses more about the climate adaptation and mitigation side of it. So it could look at, our key assets in flood zones, are they in the wildland urban interface? What are the hazards we're looking at? And maybe the city doesn't necessarily act on that information, but for future planning efforts, do you want to keep building or do you replace amenities that have been damaged? Do you put them in the same location? That kind of thing. And it also just informs, and that's why we said, maybe you're supporting, because obviously it's not just parks and recreation that would be affected by this, but also understanding what the community members themselves are going to be vulnerable to and how that could impact, shade in parks. Do you need indoor facilities for super hot days where people can charge their phones? Do you need everything to be equipped with air filters because there's smoke days and, sensitive groups can't be outside during those times. So it definitely overlaps with a lot of areas that the city is already planning for, but can also help fill gaps within that existing.
Yeah, or be even more specific to architect sessions.
Yeah.
But I do think, maybe incorporating some language that acknowledges that those other processes have been either undertaken or they are going on, like, is maybe worth doing in this one. Yeah, so people were like, they know, we know, we all know, that's.
Well, yeah,
also
and I
happening.
guess, like you said, supporting, so having all of these kind of different groups kind of network together rather than now we're in a different silo.
So more of a coordination, kind of framing it as more of a coordination, like making sure we're coordinating with SAB and with our sustainability program manager.
Yeah, and I mean, I guess putting it under this too does give it, part of the strategic plan with funding and everything else, so it makes it maybe some of the things you mentioned a little bit more actionable and concrete rather than just lovely ideas.
Yeah, I kind of agree with that point too. I think by putting it in here, you're really prioritizing things that have to be managed through the parks that aren't like a broader to the point of, climate change, climate initiative, but really thinking about how do you prioritize based on those vulnerabilities that are within the parks. And the parks to me really have the most land in the area that would want to be managed. And I would just think that the parks would want more input into how that's managed through, analysis of what's needed for the future. Especially as I think about vegetation or, pests. I think we all think about wildfire and, how are we managing the land in a way that's really conducive to preventing wildfire and keeping our community safe.
Right, anything else? Yeah. Keep rolling.
So then moving on to park activation, this is focused on making parks desirable places to be, not necessarily just providing those big ticket items, but are they comfortable? So we've got prioritizing accessibility improvements, which we've heard a lot through engagement, providing shaded areas and benches and tables and places to relax in parks, both for social gathering, but also resting or contemplative areas, things like that. And then, you got to have good, well-maintained public restrooms in some of your more highly visited parks. That's what we have in there. Okay, I do think 11 by 17 was, it helps me see it, but it's also very unwieldy to fold. We've got, providing equipment and technology in parks, designing them so that there are activity hubs within parks. Not everything needs to be spread out, but here are concentrated areas that are near each other. Improved drop-off areas and short-term parking. We heard that for a lot of the popular parks, especially where parking is challenging or very limited, that, seniors or people who need to be dropped off right away, there's not really a good spot to do those. So investigating that further, and, bike parking, obviously a good one.
Anything here? About kids missing or consistent with previous?
Which is giving them some sort of access to technology, using technology to access. I think it's all the same thing. It's all, we should have an app, we should have to get in there. We created a single one. I keep saying app because I think it's gonna work better than the
Sure.
site, but how do you do it? I mean, just the more that the more functionality you can add to that, you schedule. How do you use these parts? Manage your kinds of facilities, all that. People just love that information, QR codes, trails. What the community that you can do, it's built. What you could say is we're just creating that. I know, Rob, this is something that, sorry, this is already a process. But to the extent that we can support department and increasing that, maybe it's more, we can make that. I think if you kind of tie it all together, right? It sounds more substantial as opposed to, oh, we should have this act, we should have more maps.
Yeah, it's more of like a technology, like infrastructure plan, like you're looking at it from a plan perspective more holistically, and then how do you sort of build up to support all those things?
Yeah.
I think that's an interesting idea.
So something we can find everything in one
Yeah.
centralized location for information.
And also maybe just a bigger platform, you can have a lot of this.
Yep.
If you get more weight.
That also looks cool. See what we can do.
Good.
Yeah,
Yeah, and I think that's one that did get woven for these.
right. Yeah, I think that's just really a good point about layout and how to communicate all of these recommendations and show alignment even between different recommendations. So you're right, it's more comprehensive. You know, it's not just, oh yeah, provide technology in parks, thanks. But it's tied to the website and other, accessibility things and, getting people out in parks. Making them interesting for everyone.
Cool. Yeah. Any other thoughts?
Can also come back to some.
Yeah, we can.
Well, I just want to say I like the prioritize accessibility improvements and, that's the type of thing where I was looking at some of the comments that were at the top for the priorities from the engagement. And sometimes the accessibility stuff is lower because it impacts less people, but for those people that it impacts, it might be the only way they can access an amenity. And I think that's really important to have that prioritizing those accessibility improvements. Because we don't have a playground that's fully accessible and, and there's other amenities as well. So there are some people in our community that just can't access our playgrounds right now. And that's just an example. It's true for other facilities as well.
Yeah, I'd like to echo that, feel like there are some, especially like the disabled community that don't advocate for themselves, they just assume there's not gonna be access, and so they just adapt or they just don't participate. And, yeah, I was very happy to see how high this was. And appreciate the efforts. There's a lot of them, yeah, might not speak up, so, yeah.
You can tie that in with what we're talking about. More accessible technology thing that places are, what the gaps are. People can then give reviews on, oh, this is really hard to do this. We also serve the platform for people to be able to give input so that we don't have to go out and ask them and spend all the money on doing, we can have another way to pull that information.
So I think.
Everything's rolling, but you can't get to all of it. You're not the platform that.
No, that's what I was just thinking, that, I don't know, I think that would be something we could. Make it, because most things, I'm not trying to remember, but there's definitely a playground here, it's been a while, it's fully accessible.
The Gabriel Park in Southwest is fully accessible. Cook
Okay.
Park, I think, is.
Tiger, but yeah.
They just redid.
The moment it's tiger.
New Cook Park.
There's walls.
It's funny that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Draw like a specific one. It's like, you can't just put a rocket chair in and be like, this is it, guys, this is the, it's great, it doesn't need to be there.
Yeah.
Thinking about. And a fun, fully accessible playground where it's like super high towers, you can get there. And zip lines or whatever that you can accommodate in different skill levels and needs. But then also information at Trailhead to say if it's wheelchair accessible and what the grade is, right? And that's what the QR code is. Right, and there's a big under.
When we, the focus groups that we had early, accessibility advocate, and we heard exactly about that. So that's where some of this is coming from there too. Yes.
Just a quick comment on the, our public restrooms, I think are cleaner at our parks than any other city I've ever been.
Yeah.
They are phenomenal.
You guys get high marks.
Yeah.
Everyone who visits your parks.
That's, I mean, just to kind of take what Matt was saying about technology for some of the stuff. Maybe even implementing, maybe the high school students or whatever to come up. I mean, where I used to live, there were tennis courts that were constantly booked, so they had 2 local high school students, they developed an app to kind of check and see when the tennis courts were available. And it was great because you incorporated high schools, they did like kind of a contest and 2 students came up with it. Kids are so smart.
That's a good idea, because staff gets overwhelmed. They're like, make an app. And they're like, "I need to-"
Give them a project. Take it off Robin's plate,
And you've got some great youth leaders, I think. in this town,
Smart.
who are very smart, yeah, capable. Yeah. So, good to tap. For sure. Yeah. All right. Next one.
Okay, and actually, we will change this to park design and development, just because acquisition probably conveys the wrong message of like Oswego is all of a sudden able to acquire a bunch of new parklands. So with that tweak, we're talking about developing creative and flexible solutions where you can't suddenly acquire 10 to 20 acres to build a park. Can you use a small open space tract? Can you have some type of greenway or other linkage? Can you have it be a plaza or pocket park and still meet some recreation needs in gap areas or areas that might not have certain essential services? Then we've got, exploring opportunities to develop those unique play opportunities like sand and water play, custom play structures, universal play areas. And then off of that theme, using universal design principles within parks, not just designing strictly for ADA accessibility, but making sure that we're incorporating all types of ages and abilities into park and play design. And then for the last one, taking into account the location, the history of the site, and making the design of the park more thematic and interesting, and so that people know, oh, that's, Westlake Park, or that's Azalea Field, that it's, distinctive to people and has a unique character reflective of the area.
And for those who don't know, because sometimes we get questions about what universal design is, it's creating things to be ADA, but also to be really engaging for people with all abilities and take into consideration not just physical disabilities, but also like people who are sensitive to changes in light or sound or, any other sort of things that people might struggle with at playgrounds.
It's also making it that it's not, oh, this is the ADA.
Exactly.
It's that it's.
Yeah.
And there's certification. There's for buildings, I thought there were. That might be.
There's also something about this that, going beyond code, going beyond required, is really important. I'm dealing with the Multnomah County Library Bond right now. And the design teams are saying, but it meets code. Like, but it doesn't meet our needs as well. So it's going beyond and going above, and that's kind of the universal design principles, but it's not, but it's different. Or
Not ADA, that's great, but it needs to be.
but and even beyond, beyond what makes sense for the space or the people using the space.
I feel like acquisitions should still be in the section somewhere, because I feel like there's a couple either recreational or nature access amenities that some people have private access to in the city and there's no public access to. And obviously the lake is the largest one. And where there are some people in our city that wake up every morning to a beautiful mountain view and there's no public park. You can go see the same view. So people can buy it, they can buy the mountain view, but there's nowhere to like enjoy it at a park.
Mhm.
And I feel like that's, and
Aspen Park.
well, but can you see the mountains? You can really see the mountains there. It's a nice view,
It's the
but
best.
it's the best option. It's not, it's okay. It's nice.
Which
Um,
part?
It's kind of a hidden,
it's a little tiny pocket park on top of like a water
yeah,
facility, water storage.
yeah, no,
facility.
that's a great idea for.
Yeah, like, I mean, I've seen it even in like my area of town where it's like, there's a house, it gets torn down, you can see the mountains briefly, and then they build a bigger house and it's way up. And you can't see it, and it's like, well, we could have bought that, torn it down, put a park there. So I think there are some opportunities for like that access to nature. And then the same thing with the lake, which I think, I think that water access was a really high priority.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
Do we want to tackle that?
Yeah,
Okay.
it's the big thing.
Because that's like, we talked about this in the parks.
Awesome.
And, it kind of is kind of obvious, the town's name like Oswego, but town doesn't have access to Oswego Lake, which is. And that should be in the Lake Road, you can use Lake Road Swim Park, and there is the swim park down and,
Yeah.
but everything else. You certainly can't put anything on,
Exactly, you can't put a time, yeah, most people can.
you can. I know there's a limit,
Mhm.
and I know, so it's not like. But I mean, if this group was in favor, I would certainly support putting something specifically in, if there's an issue to explore, when properties come available, and maybe there's, all you need is a single piece of property. And I know that the lake corporation's head would explode, but. But conceivably, the city could buy a lakefront property and get access to the community.
So it sounds like we're maybe talking about, like opportunity, well, acquisition, but like opportunistic land acquisition, so some sort of recommendation where like. Parks should keep our eyes out for properties that offer something that's really important to me, like water access, like views, like.
Be like proactive opportunity.
Counting the payment and making offers.
Yeah. Not just like, oh, this came up for sale, but like, there's a property here. The kind of the
Yeah.
same way that the city did to make the connection between, Foothills and Fort Rogers. I mean, it took a long time, but the city had the goal in mind, and there was a lot of public support for it, and they kept on looking at it. That's gonna happen soon.
It's a political. But I think
It's
that,
a good conversation for the parks board to have. I mean, knowing we can say, hey, the community advisory committee was interested in this. It's a question that'll get kicked to Parks Board. If we're gonna be talking about it as part of this plan, because you guys are kind of our.
But I think isn't the recommendation though, just to make sure there's verbiage around ensuring there's acquisition language, just so that can be in there.
Yeah, and I think we can maybe even combine a couple of these as like, hey, we know that there are some things that are really important to the community, like having views, having access to water, not just on the lake, but also on the river. We've heard from lots of people, so maybe we need a new recommendation that talks about strategic land acquisition.
Yeah.
How does that work with like zoning? And those kinds of things, I mean, that gets, then it
Yeah,
gets
our planner declined our meeting today.
then you get into the weed,
It's not,
Is it even possible?
yeah, it usually is, and it just depends on what the base zoning is, and some of our base zoning allows for development of parks, but often what we do is we just request as part of our land use application, which we always have to do a land use application. When we apply to develop a new park, we would just apply to rezone the property.
But, so, another way to think about that is, some cities have, within their development codes, it's often part of like a subdivision ordinance or a set of regulations, a requirement that for developments over a certain size, as part of the development of that project, they dedicated a certain amount of land to be used as a public for parks or open space or recreation. I don't remember, I guess we go has those kind of provisions in there, but I don't think they do. There, I'm actually, doing like a 15-minute webinar presentation on this topic next week for the Oregon Recreation and Park Division.
And then
Um,
we're unlikely to have any new subdivisions here
That's the
in
thing.
the next 15 years, because they're.
So it's really hard to make that happen if you're not, you don't have a bunch of land out there that's going to be developed and at a scale where there's the need for a full park or at least a pocket park. But I do think that we shouldn't lose the idea of acquisition completely from this set of recommendations. Like, it's important to still look at those opportunities. But it's not, I think the comment here was like, maybe it's not the word we lead with, but we want to still keep the sentiment in here.
Like that,
And
the hell, we just did that.
Oh, less than that,
Yeah, it was, yeah, I did, yeah. Right,
yeah,
right.
like 3 years ago.
Very-
2, 3.
yeah,
Maybe
so
one.
sometimes it's not like a part, but it's expansion, right? Yeah, it's exactly.
But yeah, I think language about strategic acquisition and then specifically mentioning lake, river, mountain views. Because I think that those are big ones and there's stuff that people don't actually have access to. Is there something currently available? So if you are a property owner and you want to either donate your land or sell for a very reduced price to the park, is that an option?
Sure, yes, we are accepting land.
Something like promote and try to get people to think about as a charitable contribution. Organizations that really can tap into that network of people that want to charitably give. I feel like there would be people on the lake that would at some point in time maybe think about, wow, how could I leave this to my community?
Instead of a kid. too.
Right, well, that's not.
We're about to kids in the lake house.
Yeah.
We could set up a foundation where people could contribute, because
Yeah.
Sprinkler Park, it was planted with a bunch of non-invasive basic species trees, they're all falling down. And we don't have the money to take them all out. There's a lot of folks out there that use the park. Foundation to do that, and I think we could do kind of a similar.
I agree.
It might even be
Fire.
like, it might even be like somebody would do like a 30-year free lease where, you know, we're tearing down my house and I don't want somebody to build a McMansion, but I'll give it to the city for 30 years. You guys can make a community garden, do that. Or leave it open.
That's a great idea.
Yeah.
Or at least expanding our communications that, hey, this is an option if you want to kind of legally. see
Yeah,
it.
and I like the foundation idea. I think there's more to do to develop a parks foundation.
I know Milwaukee has one that does funding for their park acquisition and development. What their model is.
The other thing too is like I live in an HOA, Sunny Hill. We have 2 green spaces in our HOA that we cannot build on because of the waterway that's in the neighborhood. But they are not used at all by the neighborhood. It's like they're so not functional. They're mowed. They could be perfect for picnicking. There's one person that uses them to retrieve with their dogs because there are really no leash laws there. So, bring your dog. But I think that it would be great to have a partnership with the city in a space like that. How would one go about that?
We would probably have to reach out to the HOA president, and just start a conversation with them and see if that's something they're interested in. I believe a lot of HOAs have that in there. It's not called a charter. I can't remember what it's called with HOA, but kind of their initial agreement when they did the initial subdivision, that is like a legal document that talks about who owns and maintains, and a lot of those properties are like owned by the HOA and then maintained through a contract, so I don't know how like the legal side of that works.
So
But
that would
it seems like something, well, I mean, I don't know, I mean,
Yeah. I've seen in other cities and the difficulties, you have to get approval of like 60% of the home.
yeah, I was gonna say, I think it's like a vote.
Because you're actually giving.
I don't want more people in the neighborhood, but at the same time, I just think that there's so many kids in the community that could use that, and it could be a really fun kind of safe haven for people in the
Yeah.
community.
Yeah.
Is there any language about coordinating with HOAs? Because they are a big property owner.
No, I don't think there is, and I was actually just going and looking back at our first section that kind of talks about partnerships. I don't think we called out HOAs specifically in there, so that might be a good addition to talk.
Yeah,
Kind of coordinate with
I
HOAs.
think so, about that, and like at a minimum, even if the city's not needing that, that those spaces available for use by anyone in the city, at least encouraging the HOAs, to make them more accessible.
Yeah, giving
by
ideas,
the folks
consulting
who
on ideas.
are-
Yeah.
Own them because they're the HOA, members,
Mhm.
so I think, yeah,
Yeah.
they could promote.
And the watershed council works with HOAs.
Yeah.
Yeah,
For natural resource management. In partnerships, yeah.
It only takes one person.
Mhm.
yep, that's a great idea.
Cool.
Anything else?
Just on the, incorporating history into the parks, I know that the Willamette Falls and Landing inherited. Here that's getting close to being at least introduced to Congress, and, we have 2 sites in Lake Oswego that would be a part of it. The furnace, George Rogers and Iron Potter.
Mhm.
Somehow capitalizing on that, it's not, it wouldn't be directly part of the National Park Service, but it's a subset where the National Park Service supplies funding and then
Mhm.
the foundation kind of supports, kind of runs it. So
Cool.
it's not federal funding in terms of staff coordination, but
And I think we already provide some level of funding to that foundation. I think Westland, Lake Oswego, and Oregon City all. But yeah, that's a good.
but in terms of beefing up
Yeah.
the recognition within the park.
Yeah. So it was the iron smelter and the iron workers cottage, you think?
Awesome, thank you.
All right.
Right, walkability, accessibility, and wayfinding, make those important pedestrian and bicycle connections. Obviously is highly valued by the community and definitely important for the city to prioritize. This could include, off-street facilities, on-street pathways or bikeways, or potentially, partner owner properties, or, again, going back to that potential land acquisition, are there opportunities to make important connections that the city could have its eye on. Then considering access by motorized and public transportation to park sites. I think further in there, it's explained that the city could explore the process to develop a shuttle bus service pilot program, especially to facilities like the LORAC, be highly used, and connecting users of the LORAC or youth students, people who, is it going from downtown to the LORAC, so exploring some key sites that could be connected through that. And then, going back to the signage idea, making sure that information about trails and parks is easy to understand. Make sure that easy to understand and identify graphics are used on signs instead of a lot of text, and also that they are welcoming to residents of all cultures, but potentially provided in other languages, but definitely using and relying on infographics, which is becoming definitely a best practice, because everyone knows what a picnic table looks like, what the no fishing sign looks like, that kind of thing.
And this one also encompasses something that you'll see in a lot of our capital improvement projects, which is references our ADA transition plan, which the city has an ADA self-evaluation and transition plan that we did some number of years ago. And so it's kind of broken out into tiers, as you'll see in our capital improvement projects, but this, we have a recommendation in here that I think is really important that specifically talks about a funding strategy to get and tackle those highest priority or like really major accessibility upgrades.
The mention of multiple languages is great. Like, I feel like if multiple languages are represented on our signage, it really sends the message that it's meant to be here. And, then I worry about, you know, our members of the community that don't read English and they read in a different language and how it must be much harder to navigate them. So it'd be really amazing if we could have additional.
One high school student that we talked to had a really cool idea, which was a QR code that you can put on signs that like quickly in a bunch of languages, like, you know, use this to translate and then it will actually like translate.
Yeah.
Somehow, I don't know how it works. They knew how it worked. Translate through your phone,
Right.
all of the signage. For
But we
you.
have to get the high school.
That
We will have to get them back to.
Universal language post has welcome and all.
Yeah.
That looks really cool, and then you just have the QR code, and then that's for each different section, and then we'll have, and it can have like auditory for those that
Yeah.
are visual, you know, like, obviously.
You just have to make sure it's clear, because like I've been on websites where it's like in a different language, I'm like, I know there's an English button here somewhere, but I don't know what it is. You want to make sure,
Feasible to use.
yeah,
And I think maybe having a point of view on when you would, like, if like Oswego has a second language or a second and third language that would be prioritized on signage. Cause I do think even with a QR code, there is an impression of, well, if for you, it's one more step. Yeah, so I think it doesn't really achieve that inclusivity.
That's why I think if you have a post with welcome with all different, and then so English speakers are also. So
Yeah.
if that's the information that you're getting, that you can change and update and whatever. And then those.
We do have, actually, like Oswego's second most commonly spoken language is Mandarin Chinese. We get a list updated every so often from the school district. They track like second language and which ones are most prevalently spoken in schools. And that's how we kind of say, okay, well, these are what we think are like top 5 most commonly spoken second languages are. It's like Mandarin Chinese, Spanish, Russian, Korean.
Vietnamese.
Maybe Vietnamese. I can't recall. It just changed.
well, just be hesitant about relying too much on QR codes, because some folks still don't have access to smartphones.
Yeah.
Or the data, they might not be able to run out of data. So,
And a lot of younger people still don't. They don't have smart-
yes.
they don't have-
Yeah.
Just to echo kind of what Sarah's saying, totally agree, that's a huge, you know, the different languages would be great, also for surveys too. I think we do them already, but in multiple languages to be more inclusive.
Yep. In our website.
Anything else for this one? Then for natural resources and nature integration. I won't go too in depth with it, but community health and wellness is very much tied to access to green space and you know, all the benefits that come with exercise, being outdoors or just being surrounded by nature. And we've got all the wonderful volunteers in advocacy organizations and agencies that are focused on natural areas. And so, you know, partnering with those groups to improve, enhance, and restore them. And then obviously, definitely an ongoing one, but maintaining natural areas parks to control invasive species, remove hazardous trees, control erosion, minimize wildfire hazards, and provide safe access.
I think this one's super important too. I believe the city used to have someone solely dedicated to natural resources. And I heard that we just maybe hired someone, Eric or
Yes.
Caleb, to kind of focus.
We have a series of like, people keep applying for the new position and then we're like, okay, now we gotta fill that position. But yeah, we did, Caleb, I don't know if any of you have met him. He's one of our 2 people who takes care of all of the city's like hundreds of acres of natural areas. It's really great. And he just accepted the position of natural areas coordinator. I can't remember what the title is exactly. So we do have someone in that position
Okay,
now.
cool.
But now we have to.
Fill
this
right.
position.
He even go to commercial.
Yeah. Yeah, he's great and super knowledgeable. So he'll do a great job of implementing this, I'm sure. And actually, I told you guys this, but I learned in a meeting today that the city is developing some recommendations to address the emerald ash borer. So there might be some of you who know that name. It's a new pest that was kind of devastated ash groves in central US, and it was discovered in Oregon, I think in 2022, and it was just like, I think last week, discovered for the first time in Clackamas County. So we're preparing for that to be a really big part of the next 15 years, and so they're not in your packet because I just learned this today. But for those of you who are in Parks Board or for other folks, I can send those to you via email, but we have a couple of recommendations and those will address emerald ash borer. And it's things like, preventatively treat groves that we're aware of, identify hazardous trees where they exist. And there's one other one that Eric and Caleb are very in tune with what's going on.
My understanding that won't stop, but it will slow down significantly. So
That's my understanding as well, and I'm not the natural resource expert, but it sounds like it's kind of delaying the inevitable, but we don't know how much of our forested area is ash, but we know that there's a lot, especially in riparian areas, so preventatively treating trees can help us, buy us time so we can figure out what to replace it with when it does go. But it's a big topic to talk about in the next 15 years, so I just want to make sure that you know that it will be.
So in that regard, for this one, it's natural resources and nature integration. Does that include then education? Like, it says we have another section for programs and events. But for like invasive species, I could see that being more of a community outreach through the parks by nature. If the parks is getting rid of invasive species, it only helps us also try to get rid of them elsewhere in the community. So is that part of this, or would that be program and event?
I think that's an example of where it kind of
blurs.
Falls under both of those buckets and needs multiple goals,
Right.
but important to have it somewhere.
Yeah.
I'll get the process.
Yeah. And that's kind of one that's definitely ongoing. I mean, our parks team does a lot of work, especially as part of the stewardship program and with our friends groups and.
It's to provide safe access. Pathways in the natural areas, development. Like, there's a lot of natural areas that, like a little bit, it's just kind of, which is fine.
Yeah. That would be one example. I mean, I think providing safe access could definitely be like trails or like boardwalks or viewing areas. It could also be parking lots or creating safe, like I'm thinking of Bryant Woods, which, there's no sidewalks there to really get to it. And then once you get in, there's no parking. So it could be things like that. It's always kind of a balance of making sure we're providing access to the areas that we want people to go to, and then making sure we're preserving the really sensitive habitats in those spaces.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things that I heard from logo, especially, there's nothing really telling folks, hey, you really shouldn't go like forage and walk into this area. And other places, I think people people do, they're like actually trips.
Right, and sometimes the best thing to do in that situation is actually build a formal trail so people don't wander on their,
Right,
own. They
yeah,
like
exactly.
use the established
Right,
facility.
is that part of the recommendation or what are we,
Yeah, you're saying.
you know, like more clearly delineate
Usable
Mhm.
space.
Yeah.
Right.
explore, you use these areas.
Yeah,
Yeah, it does seem like that phrase, like, could stand a little more detail, again.
One quick comment, since it's such an important thing, that naturally. We do have somebody there. that- Yeah. We didn't have that before, but we added like, had more funding to help some of these resources we got at.
yeah, I think, well, probably it will be, as Lauren mentioned at the beginning, we're kind of addressing, funding
Yeah.
recommendations are sort of gonna be addressed in our fund,
Okay,
specific
yeah.
funding plan.
Right.
But I thought we had something
There's
about.
two in the
resources.
next section.
Okay.
Yeah, talk more about ensuring appropriate staffing.
Explore the possibility of implementing a parks maintenance fee.
Yes, that one as well would also cover some of our natural areas work, as well as our developed park maintenance.
That's the next one, right?
What is?
Explore the possibility of implementing a park maintenance fee.
Oh, yeah,
Yeah.
that's the next section. Do you have thoughts about that one?
Yeah, I'm not-
Explore the possibility.
Oh, yeah, we can go explore. park.
Stop.
I don't know,
It's an idea that's been tossed around, and never fully explored, I think, in the past. We get a lot of our funding for, maintenance and operations from the demolition tax, currently, which is very helpful. But a lot of cities have turned to, well, you probably know about this, but a lot of cities use something like a parks maintenance fee.
Yeah, there's not, I mean, you know. There's not a lot of sort of independent. Fees like that are options for cities to use that are on top of this job. And so, and there's not, it's one of the few options out there sort of for a dedicated fee that a city can establish without, for good or ill, getting it approved by the voters.
I understand now, and, but I'm not sure that this commission is really the vehicle to pitch that to the city. I mean, the city can do it, I know the city can do it, city can explore it. It's awesome, and the park board may want to look at that, I'm not sure this 2040 plan is the place to put it. Cause it's kind of a, it feels.
It was a
Sure.
staff recommendation,
Okay.
not
And
me.
it would frankly probably be a consultant recommendation if we're making recommendations about things you should explore in order to. Right. Good funding. Operations, you probably should think about this, and then the parks board and ultimately the council can decide if it stays in there or not. But sure.
Or what about, I'm not sure what that mechanism is, if you're talking about everybody pays X amount of dollars, but what about more of a use fee? So like, you know, for every exercise class I sign up for, it's now $5 more expensive, which isn't the end of the world, but that would be dedicated fees. Or the people that put on the concerts at the park pay fees, or the Shakespeare at the park pay, you know, $50, whatever, just like, and not enough that it prevents them from using it. But that way, it's the people who are using the parks are the ones who are pitching in. So,
And we would probably say, look at both of those things.
yeah.
And you already have to get your fees, and so it's, you know, are you gonna lapse? That is another way to do that, or another way to. To have more money to do things that you need to do, it's to increase your user fees. This is sort of, is a parks maintenance fee, some of the recognition there is that like everybody benefits, even if they're not using them all the time, it's there is a certain benefit to everyone. Have a good park system,
Yeah.
and they have that park system be well maintained and operated. So, I mean, yeah, I don't disagree. I'd also say it's probably worth talking about those things and see where y'all with the city went, right?
Do you know what percentage of the demolition tax is the part of the, but what percentage of the parks budget?
Substantial, if not all. Oh, you mean of the parks budget is demolition?
Right.
Oh, I don't off the top of my head. I know that it only pays for, things that are like, replacement projects, so like. This thing has then reached the end, these, I don't know, athletic field lights have reached the end of their useful life and they need to be replaced, that can be paid for by demo tax. Anything that's like capacity building, so we're building a new park over here where one didn't used to exist. That is not eligible for demo tax, and we use system development charges to pay for stuff like that.
Yeah, I just wanna say, I think that this is a good place to talk about park maintenance because. And to look at funding strategies, because the existing funding strategies are going to stop working when the city gets built out, you know, with SFB funds. And I've also seen how the parks board co-chairs had to beg when we didn't have any, like the designated, maintenance funding prior to the demo tax. What would happen then, because there was no funding for it. There was no mechanism of funding for maintenance, prior to that, other than going and begging city council, like, please throw us a little bit of your general funds so that we can replace these lights that are gonna literally fall over and hurt people. So, I mean, I think it's really crucial that the city looks and figures out a way to like sustain maintenance funding for the amenities that.
I think if you wanted to be more broad with this recommendation, one way that we could revise the language is just generally exploring fee-based maintenance. Something. Yeah.
So the issue, like, money's funny. So you can raise money. The city commits a certain amount of resources towards parks, it way exceeds the demolition. I mean, and that's because that's a priority for the city. And if you need to find something to replace the demolition, you know, to keep it. But I don't correlation between having a park maintenance fee and increasing park. Because the city doesn't have to be, unless all the park fees come budget comes that which it won't. Right? The city can just reduce the budget. I mean, it takes that money, it doesn't have to spend all the money it's currently spending. There's nothing in the, because cities need the flexibility to stuff they need to spend it. They're gonna, I mean, cities, this isn't exclusive to Lake Speaker, this is any city. They budget based on their needs, not based on where the specific money's coming. They can only use that specific money for that specific thing, but they're. And so I just think we should.
I mean, we have a list of repairs and replacements, not like immediate,
Right.
not like everything is about to fall down, but things that we know we're going to need to do over the next, I mean, honestly, 15 years.
Right.
That we currently will not have enough funding to accomplish all of those within the time frame of like their useful lifespan. So there's always 100% of the time, at least here, maybe everywhere, more projects than funding. That the projects bucket is almost always more expensive and bigger than funding, and that's normal because it's normal to not be able to have everything that you want. But
I mean, I think that the overarching goal is to have stable and set for the continued maintenance and operation of your facilities at the level the community says it desires and that you can afford the community. And I think we include park and park maintenance and operation fee in part because it's one of the few dedicated specific things out there that once the city passes that, they know they're gonna get that. And the Parks Department knows it's gonna have it, and you're not gonna, at least for that portion, but have to fight with another department or convince city council not to divert money, you know, from there.
Right.
So I think that's the point of listing that specific item, but I do think that just being clear about what the overarching goal is important, and we don't have, we could say park maintenance fee and or other.
Like,
You know,
so months we're saying increasing funding,
So,
like increasing the parks budget, I think that makes sense. And these are some of the tools as opposed to using this tool.
So just making it more,
Yeah, if that was the case, maybe more transparency with what the budget and how it ebbs and flow and over time and what the projection is, so that you can see and make a
Yeah.
valuable, like, decision based on a trend and what your projected future is, as opposed to just saying, we wanna make it better, so let's add some. Like that's,
and,
Here's what
and
I-
as we said, we're not quite there yet in
Yeah.
this process, so
Yeah.
we're headed there, but,
Honestly, I agree with Sarah. I think it might be worth looking to explore because people move here because our parks are crown jewels, like Oswego. I mean, so we want to maintain and fund them. And again, exploring is not saying we're going to do it. It's far from, but I think it's definitely worth exploring.
and again, we don't have to single out this is the only.
Sure, yes.
Right. All right, it does, and we already kind of, started on this one.
I don't know
We
if
discussed.
the other ones will be in.
Number two, we discussed.
Yeah, discussion sparking is number 2, but 3 and 4 are really just about making sure that there's funding and staffing to take care of either what you're currently doing or what you're embarking on. And then the first one is just because we heard so much about it, we thought it needed a specific recommendation, but making investments in existing fields to increase year-round playability. Either through turf fields or additional lighting, things like that, that could increase the usability of those fields.
and I have a note, Sarah, to add natural resources to, or natural areas to that last one, so that we're keep sure. We're doing this.
Yeah, any thoughts on any of the other stuff in this section?
I think that expand our capacity for grant writing is a good idea too. We just talked about that.
This might be where we can talk about some kind of like a foundation, donations. Yeah.
Final category, programs and events. Usable year-round recreation facilities, especially during the cold, rainy winter months, were desired by the community. The sports sampling programs was an idea that came out of some engagement and staff workshops. And also from our youth focus groups that we did about how they are limited on time and, formal league play is expensive and it's long and it requires a lot of commitment. So are there other ways to get people out to either learn about new sports or just provide an alternative to the well-known club sports or high school or middle school team sports that are out there? And then increasing the opportunities for gardening and food production in Lake Oswego. The Adult Community Center has some community gardens, and then Lusher Farms, of course, but are there other areas where that could be implemented, and especially connecting youth and students to gardening and food production? Learn about that. And then providing more challenging nature-based activities in parks and recreation facilities, and we listed some ideas here, but obviously the city's not limited to that. And then continuing to prioritize cultural in Lake Oswego. And, again, some existing events are identified, but obviously there's always room for events celebrating different cultures.
And that was something our council noted too.
Yeah,
I think he's been doing a great job. I think this year it was the first Pride. Then there's around the holidays, there's menorah lighting. So it's been expanding. Let's see, the cultural exchanges.
Yeah, I'll throw out of that, the cultural exchanges this weekend. Saturday. So it's really fun.
I think everything almost, other programs and events, I think they're all great ideas. I like to add the priority. last two or more. Use for 15 or 16 or. And there's, but you can see that. It's easy to sell.
I'm happy to see the expanding the tuition program. Yeah, yeah. I feel like it's great, but it's robust. But if they're really stretched, have a big tight budget, I don't know if it's robust enough to really help them. I don't know if I see on here anything about, I see like adaptive sports. Is there any mention of like programming for like neurodiverse populations or?
I don't think specifically called out here. Do you have like a specific recommendation or just kind of generally increasing programming that's
I mean, there's some,
for
like,
people?
I'm aware of like a private, like a parent who's hired like to help her run like, it's called like Run Wild PDX, and they have it over on, I don't know if you're familiar with that. It's like kids who are neurodiverse, who have intellectual disabilities, and they just get together and they like run different track events. But they had to arrange that, you know, they have to do complicated arrangements, working with, you know, I think it's the local college that they're working with, running on their track. But more things like that, because like there are gonna be kids who are neurodiverse, but that running's not their thing. Maybe playing D&D is their thing, or maybe a chess club. But like spaces where people are specifically welcomed and included.
Yep.
There is, like, yeah, like a 7 1 down or something, explore opportunities to provide adaptive sports and expand this program. So it's like, a very broad whole.
Yeah.
Let's do it, but
I think when you start thinking about like the needs of people, like you could have an adaptive sports program, but that leaves out the needs of a lot of other groups of people. So I think thinking about that more.
I think partnering with like adaptive sports Northwest and like.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Things that someone just saying, hey, you know,
Yeah.
we'd be willing to let you use our space and then do it together is the best way to do that.
Definitely,
Yeah.
definitely.
A lot. Well, I was also thinking about that from earlier with the kind of that partnership with the school district. They have definitely good tracks, or at least around the high school, when you mentioned running, that aren't busy, you know, off seasons, and holidays and stuff, and yeah, and then next weekend is the Down Syndrome Network Oregon's Buddy Walk at Millennium Park too. So that's a statewide organization that is housed in Lake Oswego. They're all here. So they always do it at Millennium Park, and their weekly fitness class is held at Lake Ridge Middle School in the indoor space. So I think there are, finding organizations that need space and meeting with the spaces we have, even if they are the school. highlighting that and making sure that people know about that, because that's the other piece too, what you gotta hear.
Right.
You know, so that.
If you could find that information. Be like, you have to be connected then.
Right, you have to get connected to know the.
Yeah.
Information.
Yeah.
Well, and I think again, that's website, right? So it's like if people went to the website, it's like, or in Hello Hello or whatever, like, here's what's coming this month, and, oh, I didn't know Down syndrome here.
Right.
I didn't know.
There's information about our partners, what they're doing.
Yeah.
And then specifically for like the neurodiverse community where, and I'm thinking specifically of kids, but maybe adults too, where folks have difficulty making social connection. And it would just be great if there were more communities where they felt welcome, and this event designed specifically where, you know, their behaviors are gonna be welcome. And
Yeah.
Maybe partnering with Lake Theater or something, you know, like. Kids to this, we're gonna accommodate that, I think not loud, just know that it's open space, so that is an option. Yeah, but someone, I guess, have to take ownership over like doing something specific. That could be-
Right,
Yeah, really good.
no, we only have about 15 minutes left, so do we wanna, are you guys okay moving on
Yeah.
to our CIP?
So, again, tonight is gonna be sort of a preview of the CIP, topic. So I'm really just gonna spend a few minutes on, here's the approach that we're using. And full disclosure, we have already started putting this list together. We got a draft list together that staff is looking at first. So we need plenty of time for staff to look at this list before then we kind of come back and show it to you and have you help the prioritization piece of it. But, so I'm gonna talk about kind of what we've been doing so far, and what we will do, and then next time we'll talk about this in more detail. We also kind of came to the conclusion that no way could we like tackle this in detail and the system-wide recommendations in detail in one meeting, like that would probably not a great idea to attempt it. So that's why you just get a taste of this tonight. So the goal here is to identify specific capital projects that, you know, achieve the vision and the goals and the strategies that we've been talking about. So these are coming from a bunch of different places. One, the city already has, well, not one, but the city already has a number of specific park master plans. A lot of you are aware of this, right? And they include specific recommended projects. In some cases, there's costs attached to them. In some cases, there's a timeline attached to them. So that's one place. The city's got an overarching CIP already for park and recreation facilities. So coming from there, and then just all of the activities that we have been, and then other city plans like the natural areas habitat management plan and the ADA transition plan that you mentioned earlier. Those have specific capital improvement projects in them as well. And then there's just all the work we've been doing in terms of meetings with you, meetings with the Parks Board, the neighborhood meetings this summer, the surveys that we've had, the focus groups that we had earlier. So all of those are sort of the source of these projects that are getting funneled into this pretty big spreadsheet that we're working on. And then ultimately we need to estimate, at least at a planning level, cost for these things. Again, some of that work's already been done and some of it will be ongoing for the next several weeks. And then we need to come up with a set of priorities. But these are kind of the sources of input and information to generate the list. So that's kind of a start. So this sort of says a little bit more about, okay, you know, when we prioritize things, what are some of the different sources of information we use to prioritize things? It's some of the same sources of information we use to put the list together. But again, the feedback we've had earlier in terms of what's risen to the top for people, what have people said is the most important to them. Your feedback, obviously, the Parks Board's feedback, some of the work from the gap areas analysis that we talked about earlier, that's definitely a useful tool for us to help prioritize projects where there is particularly a kind of high severity equity gap in a given area, or just something that's missing, it's not there. But that's really important. And then project cost and feasibility obviously is always going to be something that the city's got to think about in terms of prioritizing things and figuring out what work to do within a given time frame. So, so again, this is and then this second online survey, which we're working on getting ready to push out soon. But that'll be another source of information along with all the feedback we've already gotten from the community.
And that'll probably be the first place that this group, as well as everybody else, kind of sees that project list. So, I mean, I just want to make sure we're being clear, like we're gonna send that out. Then we'll have that list back for you guys, but also we hope that you all take the survey and kind of throw in your own priorities or tell us what's missing or what you don't like, and then we'll look at those results together.
And part of the reason the survey is not sort of ready to go is we have to figure out the best way to like ask people to prioritize things. And are they prioritizing different types of projects? Are we asking them to prioritize a list of projects at a specific park? We can't just give them a list of 150 things and have them rank all 150 things, right? So we need to be thoughtful about how, because that would be too much for, you know, maybe 5 people in the city would do that for us. Maybe you guys.
It'd be all here. I mean, I think it's not a bad idea. at least identify their.
Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely. Yes, so I think that will be one of the things we ask people that is, what do you think about this set of prioritization criteria? What things are most important to you in terms of how we prioritize things? And we may ask them, say, hey, for this park, here's all the types of improvement projects we've identified. What do you think within that park is most important? I mean, so there's different ways we can ask the question, so we're kind of figuring that out now. And then we'll put together a survey that does that, and then we'll get that out to folks. So that's not very satisfying. That's kind of,
Is the CIP list that you're asking people to get feedback on, is it the existing one or has it been? It's only
it's adding to it from all those things,
All
those
the
sources.
feedback.
that we saw. It's like, yeah, it's not just the existing.
be like
And that's what I'm
lake
saying.
access, property acquisition on it. for example?
There's definitely swim park enhancements. Usually land acquisition, unless we know a specific property isn't like a capital improvement, because we don't know, it's like, these are like site specific recommendations, like we don't know how much that would cost, because we don't know what the property is.
Expanded lake access or like kayaks and expanded paddleboard.
That's more of like a system-wide recommendation
Okay.
than a
So it's
site
not-
specific. It's not like a capital improvement until we have more specifics, if that makes sense, because we can't like attach a cost to that. I mean,
Oh, I could.
well. You're hired.
Yeah, and so again, that survey is under design, so you know, you'll hear more about it. But it is a little bit tricky, given the length of the list, right? So we have to figure that out. So we've got a couple slides here that just kind of show you examples of things that are in the list that came from other places or specific sources of information. So for instance, you know, you've got again a variety of plans that have already been prepared, adopted, reviewed. So these are just some examples of those. The clearly, you know, the Western Area Master Plan is already there and it identifies some specific improvements to that facility, and so some of those end up being, you know, in this larger list. Same thing with the Canal Area Master Plan. And same thing with the Prestige Park Master Plan, and it may not end up in this list, may end up somewhere in an updated list down the line, but athletic fields study is also gonna be underway here soon. So that may be a source of like future additional projects. This is not something, like, we will have the CIP that's part of this plan, but it's something the city's gonna have to be adding to.
Yeah.
All the time. So that's just another kind of thing. Yeah.
I have two questions about the survey. Are you gonna be collecting demographic data on people? Because I think it would be really important to pull out folks with disabilities. This is what they're prioritizing for folks.
We always collect a certain amount of demographic data. And don't always ask people about, do you have a disability or you have a disability, but we could potentially ask that question.
We probably will. So one thing that I've been working on with a couple of our like analyst folks is like developing like a set of demographic questions that we try to use more consistently in our surveys throughout the city. And it does include a question about like, do you or does anyone in your household live with a disability? In addition to a bunch of other.
Yeah, so
demographic
we
questions.
do always have demographic questions, and we usually kind of put them towards the end so people get a little comfortable answering the other questions, and they feel more comfortable answering those kind of questions. And they're always also frankly kind of optional.
It's required that we mark them as optional. People don't have to answer them if they don't.
But yeah, it's really important, I think, for us to kind of know demographically.
I've always thought it would be useful to explain why the city's asking that, so they can make sure. that
Yes.
We do usually have a statement before the demographic question. It says, here's why we're asking these questions. Here's what we will or won't do with this information.
And my other question was, is this gonna be a statistically valid survey, or are you just doing it?
It's not going to be a statistically valid. No. Yeah. we only had, those are really expensive. And we did one early in the process. We did not have budget for two.
So it'll be easy to ship it one way, but you get a lot of friends.
But that's part of the reason to add those demographic.
Right.
questions. We can say, here's at least for the folks who answer those questions, here's what we know about the demographic mix of respondents versus the demographic makeup of the city.
And if we see that it wildly doesn't match the priorities that we got in our statistically
Right.
balanced survey, we'll say, huh, Sarah must have been.
But yes, Sarah, you
Really
can knock
active.
yourself out.
Yeah, Sarah had her lunch.
Exactly.
I said, how many times we go?
And we try to limit it.
We do, yeah. We do
Right.
have ways to make sure.
The surveys are not a perfect tool, and that's why it's only one of the things that we use to inform.
All right, it's got kind of a couple more here. These are again, just other examples, which we already mentioned, I think, of other points that include specific projects that are informing our larger list of the AD self-evaluation and transition plan that you mentioned earlier. It's like it has our logo on it, we have time to.
You did.
I didn't, but our firm,
MHG.
like you did, and then the natural areas habitat management. Projects, specific, projects in there that will get followed in this list as well. The gap areas analysis, again, important tool in terms of thinking about particularly how to prioritize things. And also, this helped us identify specific projects that are going into the list, not just priorities, but, oh, hey, we think there's a need for a play area at this park because there is one, there's a gap here. So that was important. Has been important. And then just community feedback, these are just some examples of things that, that came up, from people who participated in meetings. Some of them came up a lot. Some of them were more specific things where somebody said, wow, it'd be great if you could do this, so, so there's lots of sources of examples. So just the question here, does that make sense? I know it's still kind of not fully formed, but in terms of the approach and the kind of information we're using, sound like we're on track. Yeah,
I'm just wondering, does it seem like the ones you're looking at are spread around the city?
I would say they are, yeah, for sure. And the other thing, so I'll say a couple more things about just the list and how we're categorizing things. So, one, we're identifying or given the list is organized by park. So you can kind of see when you see it, because these are specific park or facility, because these are specific projects, like site specific projects. So you'll have a sense, you see the list, like, how well are they spread around? Two, we have information in that spreadsheet, it's basically a giant spreadsheet, about does it fill a gap in one of those essential service areas that we looked at as part of the gap. So play for children, sports and exercise, natural area access, or trails and pathways. We've got information about that. Is it meeting a need or filling a gap in one of the areas that we identified in the equity analysis, the high severity need? That's what we call it, but whatever we call it. Is it meet one of those needs? Where did it come from generally? So we're trying to kind of infuse as much of that information in there as we can, because that will help us evaluate things, but it'll also just help inform, why is this important? Why did this get added to this list? And why might it be priority? So, yeah, that was a long answer here. Straightforward. All right, so more to come on that, probably even more than you'll want to see eventually. So I think the last one is just next steps, which is good. Perfect. So we've already kind of talked about some of this earlier in the meeting. So Parks Board meeting next week. So those of you who are at the Parks Board are going to get to see this again. Sorry about that. And then talked about the survey, the other things that are happening kind of concurrently. One is the SDC systems development charge methodology update. We we can't complete that until we have a capital improvements list. And we can say what portion of each of those improvements is sort of meeting the needs of new growth, new households or residents. So that's another like piece we have to funnel into that. And there's a number of other things that kind of go into that SBC methodology that we've been talking about, but that's underway. And then along with that is, okay, what are the other types of funding and implementation strategies that are important to highlight in the plan? We talked about some of that this evening. And then after that stage, we'll have, so we're gonna meet with you again in October. The October 9th.
We had originally talked about October 9th and then talked about moving it
Okay.
to the 20. That would be the actual date. We would be reversing the order, and this time we would have our Parks Board meeting first, and then we would meet here again on October 22nd. That, I know
October
Tuesdays are
22nd.
always the best for you, but we have work.
My schedule shifted.
Okay,
5:30 to 7:30.
yeah, we would do it same location, same
Wait,
hours,
say that again?
with cookies again,
Wait, back up to the next meeting,
Tuesday, October 22nd,
22nd,
Right, following.
instead of the 9th.
instead of the 9th.
Gosh. Didn't put it on my calendar.
Okay, great, I'll move.
Yeah, right. So our last meeting is gonna either be in December or January.
Yeah.
Well, let me know. We may, it's a tentative date, but I'll send out.
Sorry, looking at my own calendar, but. We will be meeting with you soon. It sounds like, we'll likely be again, kind of flipping the order. Typically, we talk to you and then talk to the Parks Board. In this case, flip that order. Yeah, okay, maybe. And then subsequent to that, in the survey, we're moving to, again, sort of a plan development stage and then ultimately adoption. And so after the October meeting, one more meeting with this group and one more meeting with Park Board prior to kind of moving towards adoption. So that's the longer term schedule.
I think January for like most people is a little less crazy than December.
Yes, I would do agree.
Yeah.
I would say that's.
Yeah, I got told our last beginning of 2025.
Yeah,
Kick off the year.
Parks Plan 2025.
In the new facility.
Yeah.
Yeah, in the.
That's it.
Yes. Thank you all.
Hey, thank you for your continued time. It really is appreciated.
Yeah.
Please have another cookie. On your way out.
I mean, I'll leave. That's it.
Sure, that's what you want to stop.